Welcome to another exciting episode of Culturally and Technically Legal, the show where we examine the intersections of culture, law, and technology. Today, I'm joined by a very amazing and special co-host.
I'm Za'tozia.
So Za'tozia is joining us today to have a great conversation with none other than Miss Natasha Alford. Natasha is an award-winning journalist, host, and media executive driven by the power of storytelling to inspire and change people's lives. Natasha serves as the Vice President of Digital Content for TheGrio and an anchor for TheGrio TV. She is also a CNN political analyst, offering commentary on the news, politics, and movement to moment. Also, another really cool part about Natasha is she just dropped her memoir right here, American Negra. We're going to dive into a little bit of that throughout the interview, but without further ado, I'd like to welcome Miss Natasha Alford to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How y'all doing? Thanks for having me.
No, we're super excited to have you. We're happy we could make this happen. I think you just offer so much to the community, to the culture, to just our understanding of politics, perspective, social norms, so many other things. So we're just truly happy to have you here. So thank you for joining us.
No, it's truly an honor. And being a Syracuse native, it just fills my heart to see y'all up there being brilliant, representing, holding it down at the university. It is not a small thing. So thank you for being there.
Thank you, thank you. So before we jump into the interview, just kind of your journey, right? I've done a lot of research on you, me and Z both, and we've learned everything from you having, working with Teach for America to, being in, boardrooms from an investment standpoint. And then obviously being at TheGrio and at CNN, you've kind of been in so many different spaces, kind of it's been a variety to your career. So just, did you plan it this way or were these micro journeys all just part of the pulling you here, pulling you there to come into this, what you are today? Could you kind of just unpack that for us a little bit? Because I think it's cool when I see people take this alternative path as opposed to this traditional linear path.
Well, thank you for making it sound nice, because some people would say it's a mess. You're all over the place. What do you want to do? What's happening? One of my favorite quotes is all who wander are not lost. And I think what I did in my 20s was really be open to this idea of wandering, not being afraid to, break the golden handcuffs, so to speak, when I had a high paying job, or to really be introspective and say, is this really what you want to do? Is this really where you want to be? And I think for a lot of us, it's so easy to get caught up in checking things off our boxes, right? Or checking boxes off our list, rather. So I have to get this degree. I have to do this type of job to get me in this position. And the most important question you can really ask is who you want to be, how you want to show up in the world, and then sort of craft your journey around that. And so I think at different points in my life, I was looking for different things. And at each stage, each decision that I made to change lanes or change paths, I was getting closer and closer to being honest with myself about who I wanted to be. And so that's part of why I wrote this book, American Negra, was I wanted other young people to see that everybody's path isn't perfectly straight or smooth, and that you can make changes, you can be brave, and the universe will honor you if you are honest with yourself.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think honesty, all kind of falls into ethics, I would say, right?
Absolutely. And so, with that question, I want to gauge more into your career, especially we're in the age of AI and robotic intelligence. How do you ensure that you're putting out superb work while also not compromising from an ethical standpoint?
Yeah. So, one of the things that you learn about journalism when you study it, I have a master's degree in broadcast journalism, is that it's more than just vibes, right? Journalism is not just, being on camera or putting your name on a byline, but it really is a craft and it's a science as well as being an art. And so I think AI is a tool, like many other things, right? And while some people may fear the sort of technological innovation, I think that we can understand it as a tool while also understanding there's certain things that only a human being can bring to journalism. So I think that we need to be open to certainly learning about it as journalists and media professionals, but there has to be a clear distinction between when a human being wrote something and when AI was involved in the process. AI, for all of its, fascinating elements, also can make mistakes. And people who have been sharing about the technology have been very honest about that it's not a perfect tool. So I don't think we're in a place where we can, just turn over the function of journalism, of reporting, of analysis to AI without understanding that there's still a lot of these flaws. And again, just from a human perspective, when I think about all the interviews that I've done, the sort of nuances, the cultural understanding that I needed to have to tell certain stories, that's something that only I can do as a human being. And I think that there's a special touch that we add as journalists. So in summary, I would say we shouldn't fear it. We should certainly know about it because it's here, whether we like it or not. But there's definitely a difference between, what we do as storytellers, and what the machine does or imitates. And I also want to say really quickly, like, I'm in graduate school right now, even as a working journalist, and I have one class that actually allowed us to use AI. So I have been interacting with Chat GPT-4, which is like the most advanced version right now. And I see, again, that it can be helpful for brainstorming, for thinking about outlines and all of those things. But it certainly is tempting if you don't have the right ethics in place, right? You don't have those boundaries in place to take the easy way out, or to sort of get lazy, in terms of relying on the machine too much. And so that's why it's important to know its power, while also making sure that, you separate when a person is working on something versus the computer doing it.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I had a previous guest and he's a screenwriter, producer in Hollywood. One of the things he said was, yes, people are utilizing AI more in the craft, but he's like, AI never had a bad childhood, right? And he's like, how much in tune can they give you this really organic story? And talking about stories, talking about childhood, right? I have to reference your book, right? Loved it, loved every piece of it, every bit of
Thank
it.
you. Thank you.
I've read it both ways, through here, through Audible, like just to hear your voice tell this story. And within the book, you tell this amazing coming to age story regarding what it means to be multicultural, right? Not necessarily multiracial, right? Multi-ethnic, if you will. You personally growing up in a Puerto Rican, African American household specifically, could you talk a little bit about the difference? Because you see social media all the time. People are like, oh, I'm not this. I'm German. I'm not this. I'm Dominican. I'm not. You see these things all the
Yeah.
time. So could you kind of shed a little bit of light into what being multicultural, multi-ethnic is, and how it's not the same as being multiracial, and kind of talk about, like, to the point I mentioned, no artificial intelligence machine ever had a bad childhood. Talk a little bit about what it was like growing up in that capacity and coming from that household.
Yeah. A lot of people will ask you in life, what are you? And when I would tell people I was African American and Puerto Rican, people assumed that meant I was multiracial or biracial. But the question that I would ask is, how do you know if I'm biracial? What if both of my parents are Black, right?
Right.
So my mother could be, Puerto Rican and a Black woman, and my father could be African American and a Black man. But we always make the assumption that when someone says they're Latino, or that they come from a country that, is presumed to be in Latino or is part of Latin America, that means that they're light skinned, or tan, right? Or this sort of mestizo image that we've come to associate with Latinidad. And so really what I'm challenging people to do when they learn through American Negra is to realize that race, ethnicity, nationality, those things are different things. Race, it is a social construct. It is something that we've made up. We know that all human beings are the same, but our, phenotypical features, the way that we group people, when we say someone is Black or someone is white or someone is Asian, that's what race is. But ethnicity is culture. Ethnicity is customs. It is sometimes a shared language. And so in the case of Latinos, uh, Often Latinos speak Spanish. Some actually also speak Creole and other languages because, we know that Portuguese, right? Brazilians are technically part of Latin America. But it's this idea of having a shared experience, and that's what bonds us. Similar for Black people, African Americans, right? That is a ethnicity because we have a shared culture. And then there's nationality. That's the actual country that you come from. So I may ethnically be Latina, but my actual country of origin could be Puerto Rico, or it could be the Dominican Republic, right? And so it's important to have those distinctions because they are frankly different experiences and they're different histories. What Dominicans have gone through compared to what Puerto Ricans have gone through, or what Cubans have gone through, has shaped their perception of the world in different ways. And so it's important that we have this nuance when we have these conversations. So we can also understand people better. I know that the funny thing to say, the funny quote is, "I know Black, I'm Dominican."
Yes, yes,
We know
yes.
we've heard that again and again, right? But as funny as it is, and as valid as the point is, that there are some Dominicans who are as Black as we are, who don't see themselves as Black. There are also a lot of Dominicans who are proud to be Black and who have considered themselves Black from birth and are very connected to their Afro-Dominican roots and traditions. And so it's important that we also take the time to learn about those things rather than just sort of lean into the simplistic stereotypes of, all Afro-Latinos denying their Blackness, and other stereotypes that come up in the diaspora wars. So I think those goals are really intertwined in the storytelling that I do in American Negra, and I hope people can appreciate that intention.
No, I definitely appreciate it myself. For me, one of the things that I quickly understood from traveling abroad was that you did see Blackness appear almost everywhere you went, right? From Egypt to Puerto Rico, as you mentioned. And one of the things I really enjoyed about your book, per se, as well as your documentary, was that you really leaned into this bigger Black diaspora, which I think is important to have these conversations and stories about people in other places that's going through similar things that Black people here in the States may be going through. Within that, one of my favorite chapters within the book is chapter 17. You talk about Marcus Rivera, who's like the Puerto Rican version of, our Ben Crump. And then you even go on to talk about some of these Black social political groups and movements that are working to utilize data. And I think there was a specific quote that said something to the effects of, data can spark policy change and support. I thought that was really important as a guy who's really into this tech running space. Could you kind of unpack what was meant by that particular quote within chapter 17?
For sure. And thank you for reading it. I still get chills when people refer to things in the book. It's the ultimate honor as an author. So, look, I mean, data is information, right? Data is power, it tells stories. And that's why we have now journalists who are exclusively devoted to data journalism, because it's not about assumptions, it's about using information that is readily available in the world and organizing it in a pattern, reading these patterns in the data so that we can understand ourselves in the world. And in many places in Latin America, that are not tracking race, there are issues with racism that are going unaddressed. Policymakers are unable to craft policies that address racial disparities because we are treating everyone as if they are the same, even though their experiences are not. And some of that comes with consciousness. So if you're told all your life, I'll use Puerto Rico as an example, you're Puerto Rican, you're Puerto Rican, you're Puerto Rican, right? We don't pay attention to race. Race is not important. But when you go to apply for a job, you're getting denied. Your access to healthcare is worse than perhaps your lighter skinned Puerto Rican neighbors and counterparts. Your experience is different as a Black Puerto Rican, but because of this silencing of conversations about race, and because we're not actually tracking your experience in surveys, in different interactions with the government or the state, we're not able to see what those problems are. And so that's why you've seen activists encourage Black Puerto Ricans, to, when they fill out the census, actually check that they are Black. even though many have been told that, to be Puerto Rican is to be automatically mixed, right? You have a person who's as chocolate as, my dad, with 4C hair, who's like, I'm mixed, right? Because they've been told that somehow maybe they're not Black. And that's not every single person, but that's just an extreme example to say that this is about consciousness raising. And when people have a raised consciousness, they understand the importance of tracking data and how that goes into the social policies that we create.
Oh, that's deep. That's deep.
Yeah, so it's actually so interesting. We're talking about public policy and we're talking about, consciousness. I really want to dive more into scrutiny. I believe that it's imperative that voters, especially those tuning into this podcast, with the utmost thoughtfulness and discernment. What recommendations would you strongly give that voters can use to carefully scrutinize, whether it be the candidates, their policies, or track records, or personal values?
Mm. Scrutinize your sources. That is like my number one piece of advice. Don't let the algorithm control how you think. And too often, I think we have a passive approach to consuming the news where we open our phones and whatever the algorithm gives us based on, a few interactions that we've had, the algorithm sort of designs and pulls content that it thinks appeals to us or replicates what we've read before. We could be denying ourselves the opportunity to learn from diverse sources. We can get a little bit too comfortable following the same sources, and particularly when those sources are blogs, right? And not necessarily journalists, because these blogs imitate the style and the presentation of journalists who've done the work with their headlines and their bylines and their sort of presentation of a story as if it is the truth. But oftentimes they haven't done the work in terms of vetting the information that they're putting out, right? Or quoting reliable sources. And so often you'll see a blog post something and then post another, update, not acknowledging that they had the information wrong the first time. They just sort of update it and there's no conversation about it. So I think it's important that you curate really intentionally the news that you're consuming, and you also are aware of different viewpoints. As painful as it sometimes is, do watch Fox News, but again, with not in a passive way, but to really understand how the other side, quote unquote, thinks. The other side, meaning people who are extremely conservative, hard right, and what the hard right sort of messaging is in the world, because you could see how a story is often spun to fit a certain audience's expectations or reaffirm assumptions that they already have. So it's important not to live in a media bubble. It's important to scrutinize your sources and to ask how somebody knows something. And in a world where opinion does really well, opinion gets clicks, opinion, gets views again on the algorithm, too often we are consuming opinions back and forth without actually just even knowing the basic facts of a story, of a policy, of a politician's agenda. So those are all things I think we have to be really, really thoughtful about. And I think it's possible to do it. It just takes a little work.
Thank you so much for
No,
that.
no, that was really deep, and I couldn't agree with you more. But to shift gears briefly for a moment, we can't let you leave today without telling you congratulations on
Yeah,
graduating from
Thank you.
in public policy. Um, Obviously, we talk about so many things from misinformation to biases to artificial intelligence, playing with ethics and so on and so forth. And, how, like I said, you play both sides of it, right? You're an executive and you're also a talent, right? How do you plan on utilizing, this public policy degree that we just mentioned, on the front lines? And how has this kind of changed the way that you look at so many of the topics that we touched on today?
That's a good question. I like that you said on the front lines, because that's exactly what I intend to do, is to take this policy body of knowledge and use it in my journalism. I honestly had gotten to a point in journalism where I was just tired of talking about problems. Like I felt like as the media, quote unquote, even though we're very diverse media professionals, we were often talking about what was wrong what wasn't working, who wasn't doing what. And I needed to understand, well, how do you actually make a difference? What policies do you craft that change people's lives? What policies are changing people's lives for the better? I think those are the stories that we have to start sharing, not just for the purpose of making people feel good or giving them hope, but to show them that this is what a path to change making looks like. And I think this body of knowledge of policy making is one that particularly Black people need to have in this country. This is about more than being right. We hear a lot of speeches, we hear a lot of moving conversations about the change that we want. But when you actually ask people, well, who's your representative, right? Or what piece of legislation was passed recently that has shaped your life, or what piece of legislation would you want to see pass? You will get differing responses. Some people knowing how to make the system work in their favor, and some not knowing. So what I want to do is level the playing field and give people knowledge about this is what it takes to make a change. And then, when they have this knowledge, it's up to them what they do with it.
No, I couldn't agree with that more. I think knowledge is power. I know that's often said, reiterated. I don't mean to sound cliche, but it generally is power because it can literally create a whole new avenue that you didn't know exist. And that's what I find. But as we mentioned, we don't want to keep you too long, so I'm gonna let Z take us out with the final question of the day.
So, as a young journalist myself, looking up to amazing trailblazers and journalists like you, my question would be, what advice would you give to journalists who are looking to make an impact in the field?
Just do the work, one story at a time. If you really treat every story like it's like shooting in the gym, right? I remember being in journalism school and they said the only way to learn journalism is just to do it. You have to go out and do the interviews and write the stories, and you do it again and again. And you will be surprised the ways in which you grow, the way that your instincts get sharp, the way that fear that might be in your stomach when you're first starting out, being on camera, asking questions, the way that it subsides a little bit with time. This is all about practice. This is all about putting yourself in enough diverse situations as a storyteller that you can be dropped anywhere and lean on the fundamentals of journalism to get you through that, to get a story out of that. So I'm excited for the next generation of journalists. I think you and we really have tools that past journalists only dreamed about, but we also have challenges that past journalists could have only dreamed about. We're fighting an incredible amount of disinformation and distraction and shorter attention spans. So learn how to be multi-platform and very diverse in terms of the way that you tell stories, being able to tell a long story, a short story, a story for social media. All of that only will be an asset to you in a world that is, changing quickly and fast, but that needs good journalism more than ever.
Such a powerful response. I mean, Natasha, literally, we're over here in chills.
Yeah.
I can't even think what my next word is going to be forever. So,
I'm just so happy to be here.
no, thank you so much for joining us today from the bottom of our hearts. This has been an amazing interview, an amazing opportunity, and just some dialogue to really get us thinking and to get our feet to the boots to the ground. So thank you so much. Audience, I want to thank you all for watching another episode of Culturally and Technically Legal, the show where we examine the intersections of culture, law, and technology. And come on, we had the great one, Miss Natasha Alford. Make sure you're going to go check out her book. It's an amazing book. My favorite memoir to date. I'm a big Will Smith fan as well. But Natasha Alford, thank you. Book. He has a great book as well. But this is the one right here. You won't regret it. I'm buying it as gifts for people at this point. This one is actually a gift to you. So shout out to you. No doubt. I already had one. I already got one from my mom. But thank you all for watching this episode. Looking forward to seeing you on the next episode, and stay tuned in. Thank you guys.